She confessed no one could ever love her broken pieces, until he refused to let go. She had learned to smile through the wreckage. Avery Cole was 31 years old, lived in a neat little apartment in downtown Chicago, and had a calendar full of plans she rarely kept. To anyone looking from the outside, her coworkers at the marketing firm, the barista who knew her order by heart, the neighbors who waved in the hallway, she seemed perfectly fine. But fine is the most dangerous word in the English language, because fine means surviving, and Avery had been surviving for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to actually live. The night everything changed night, her best friend Dana had practically dragged her to a rooftop gathering in Lincoln Park, one of those effortlessly beautiful social events where everyone seemed to belong except Avery. String lights hung overhead, jazz played softly in the corner, and laughter floated through the warm summer air like it cost nothing. Avery stood near the railing, white wine in hand, watching the city below pulse with life. "This is fine," she told herself. "I'm fine." That's when she heard a voice beside her. "You look like someone who'd rather be somewhere else entirely." She turned. He was tall, broad shoulders, dark blue shirt rolled at the sleeves, warm brown eyes that held something steady and unrushed. He smiled like he had nowhere better to be. "Is it that obvious?" she asked. "Only to someone who feels the same way." He extended his hand. "I'm Marcus, Avery." They shook hands, and something in that brief moment felt different. Not electric, not Hollywood dramatic, just different, like two people recognizing something familiar in each other without being able to name it yet. They talked for 2 hours straight, about everything and nothing. His work as a trauma therapist in Oak Park, her complicated relationship with ambition, the way Chicago winters either broke people or made them fierce, old movies, the specific grief of losing a parent too young, the weird loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling invisible. By the time Dana found Avery and raised an eyebrow that said, "Who is this?" Avery was laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in longer than she cared to admit. Marcus asked for her number before she left. She gave it to him, then spent the entire Uber ride home convincing herself it meant nothing. It meant something. He texted the next morning. Not something clever or performative, just, "I kept thinking about that thing you said about grief feeling like background noise. That stayed with me." She stared at those words for a full 5 minutes. Most people didn't notice the things Avery said. Most people were too busy waiting for their own turn to talk. They went on their first date the following Tuesday, a low-key Italian place in Wicker Park with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. They closed the restaurant down. The second date was a Sunday at the Art Institute, wandering through galleries and debating what made something worth preserving. The third was a rainy evening cooking dinner at her apartment, a disaster of burned garlic bread, and a surprisingly perfect pasta that they ate sitting on her kitchen floor, because neither of them wanted to wait to set the table. By the fourth week, something was shifting inside Avery, and that's exactly when she started pulling away, because this was the pattern. She knew it. She had lived it enough times to recognize the exact moment it happened, the moment someone got close enough to actually see her, and she detonated the whole thing from the inside before they could. It had happened with Ryan, the architect she dated at 26 who wanted to build a future and found she'd already packed her emotional bags. With Jonah, the kind, patient teacher who told her she was impossible to reach. With every man who had eventually grown tired of knocking on a door she refused to open. And the worst part, she didn't blame them. She blamed herself. She had told herself the story so many times it had become truth. She was too damaged, too guarded, too much work for too little reward. No one was built to love someone like her, someone who woke up at 3 a.m. convinced she was a burden, who smiled at parties while falling apart inside, who had spent so long protecting herself that she'd accidentally built a fortress with no door. On a quiet Wednesday evening, Marcus came over. He noticed immediately, the way she moved around him with careful distance, the way her answers were shorter, polite, contained. He sat on the couch and looked at her steadily. "Talk to me," he said. Just that. No accusation, no frustration. Avery sat across from him and looked at her hands. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely at the space between them.
I don't know how to let someone in. Every time I try, I ruin it. I push people away, or I shut down, or I say the wrong thing, and—"
Her voice cracked. "No one wants to deal with that. No one should have to deal with that." The tears came before she could stop them. She had promised herself she wouldn't do this. Not yet, not in front of him. But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't shift uncomfortably or check his phone or reach for the exit. He moved to sit beside her, and when she tried to pull her hands into her lap and disappear into herself, he gently took them in both of his. "Avery, look at me." She did. "I know what you're doing," he said softly. "You're waiting for me to confirm what you already believe about yourself, that you're too broken, that it's only a matter of time before I leave." He paused. "I'm not going anywhere." She shook her head. "You don't know that. I know me." His voice was calm, unwavering. "And I know that what you just showed me, that right there, is not something that makes me want to run. It makes me want to understand." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want to sign up for this?" "Why, for a moment?" "Because I've sat across from hundreds of people in my office," he said, "and the bravest thing any of them ever did wasn't pretending to be okay. It was exactly what you just did, telling the truth when it terrified them." He squeezed her hands. "You think you're broken, I think you're honest. That's not a burden, Avery, that's rare." She didn't have a perfect response to that. She didn't suddenly feel healed. The fortress didn't crumble in one night. That's not how it works. Not in real life, not for people carrying the kind of weight Avery had carried for years. But something shifted. Not dramatically, not with swelling music or a perfectly composed moment, just quietly, the way light changes in a room without you noticing until suddenly everything looks different. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her. They sat there in the silence of her apartment, the city moving outside her window, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Avery didn't feel like she had to perform being okay. She was just there, and so was he. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. There were nights she went cold and couldn't explain why. Mornings she woke up convinced she had already ruined everything. Moments when old voices in her head grew louder than his. But Marcus was consistent in a way she had never experienced. Not perfect. He had his own edges, his own bad days, his own history that made him human and complicated and real. But he showed up. He communicated. When she went quiet, he didn't chase or punish. He simply said, "I'm here when you're ready," and meant it. And slowly she began to believe him. She started therapy, something she had resisted for years, convinced she was too self-aware to need it, which her therapist pointed out was itself a defense mechanism, and Avery laughed because of course it was. She started letting herself take up space, in conversations, in relationships, in her own life. Started noticing when she was shrinking out of old habit and choosing, consciously, to stand a little taller. She started for the first time in a very long time to let herself be known. 6 months after that rooftop party, Marcus and Avery were sitting on the floor of her apartment again. Pizza boxes open, some documentary playing in the background neither of them was really watching. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. That first night, at Dana's thing, why did you walk up to me?" He smiled. "Because you were standing at the railing looking at the city like it had personally disappointed you. And I thought, that's either someone who's given up, or someone who hasn't given up yet, but needs someone to notice the difference. Which was I?" He looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he always did. Like she was worth the time it took to truly see someone. "Someone worth noticing," he said simply. Avery reached over and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. For the girl who had spent 31 years convinced she was too broken to be chosen, too guarded to be loved, too complicated to be worth the effort. Being noticed was everything. And that, it turned out, was where her real life began. Not in the absence of her wounds, not in some future version of herself who had it all figured out, but right there, imperfect, still healing, finally trusting, in the hands of someone who looked at all of it and said, "I'm not going anywhere. The end."